My beloved child, stop scrolling and stay here for a moment, because this fictional spiritual message carries the feeling of a heart standing at a crossroads, and before your soulmate closes a door they may secretly wish could remain open, there is something they need to hear. They have been telling themselves that goodbye is the only answer left. They have been trying to convince their heart that walking away will finally bring peace, that distance will eventually silence everything they feel, and that if they disappear completely, perhaps the memories will become easier to carry. But my beloved child, beneath that decision is a truth they have not been brave enough to admit. Part of them does not want to leave. Part of them is hoping for one reason to stop. Part of them wants to hear something that tells them the connection was not meaningless, that the emotions they carried were not imagined, and that the silence between you did not erase everything that once felt real. Yet before you misunderstand this message, hear me clearly, you are not being asked to chase someone who has chosen to go. You are not being asked to beg anyone to remain. Love that requires you to abandon your dignity in order to keep another person close is not the kind of love you should build your future around. What your soulmate needs to hear is not desperation. It is truth. They need to understand that there is a difference between leaving because something is genuinely over and leaving because fear has convinced them that ending everything is safer than having one honest conversation. And right now, in this imagined message, they are struggling to know which one they are doing. They have spent days, perhaps longer, rehearsing this goodbye inside their mind. They have imagined what they would say. They have imagined disappearing quietly. They have considered whether it would be easier to send a final message or simply allow the distance to become permanent. They have told themselves, maybe this is for the best. Maybe they will be happier without me. Maybe I need to stop holding on to something that has become too complicated. But every time they attempt to make that decision final, something inside them resists. Your face enters their mind. A memory returns. A conversation they thought they had forgotten suddenly becomes vivid. And then the certainty they were trying to create begins falling apart. My beloved child, your soulmate's greatest conflict is not between loving you and feeling nothing. If they felt nothing, goodbye would be easy. Their conflict is between what they feel and what they believe they are allowed to hope for. They are afraid that too much has happened. They are afraid you no longer trust them. They are afraid you have become tired of waiting for clarity. They are afraid that if they finally tell you the truth, you may look at them and say, "You waited too long." And because they fear hearing those words, they are considering leaving before giving you the opportunity to say anything at all. That is how fear protects itself. It says, reject the possibility before the possibility can reject you. It says, walk away first so you do not have to experience being left. It says, pretend you no longer care so nobody can see how deeply you care. Your soulmate has listened to that voice more times than you know. There were moments when they wanted to come closer to you, but fear told them to wait. There were moments when they wanted to tell you what they felt, but pride told them not to appear vulnerable. There were moments when they could have asked you directly what was happening between you, but insecurity convinced them they already knew the answer. And every unspoken word created another inch of distance until eventually they looked at the space between you and wondered whether crossing it was still possible. Now they are standing at the edge of that distance telling themselves goodbye may be easier than trying. But my beloved child, there is something they need to hear before they make that decision. Not everything that became complicated was necessarily destroyed. Confusion is not always the same as rejection. Silence is not always the same as absence of feeling. Fear is not always intuition. Sometimes two people can care deeply while simultaneously protecting themselves so aggressively that neither person feels safe enough to move first. That does not mean the relationship should automatically continue, but it does mean an ending made entirely from assumptions may leave both hearts carrying unanswered questions. Your soulmate needs to ask themselves whether they are truly saying goodbye to you or whether they are saying goodbye to the possibility because they are afraid to discover what would happen if they tried honestly. There is one conversation they keep replaying. You may remember it differently. Perhaps it seemed ordinary to you, but something happened in that conversation that stayed with them. Maybe you became quieter. Maybe you said something that sounded like you were tired of uncertainty. Maybe you stopped reassuring them in the way you once did. They interpreted that moment as evidence that your feelings had changed. They did not ask. They simply stored the moment inside themselves and allowed fear to build a story around it. They're moving on, they thought. They don't need me anymore. Maybe I should leave before I become even more attached. But what they never considered was that your distance might have been self-protection rather than lack of love. Perhaps you were not trying to punish them. Perhaps you were exhausted from carrying emotional weight without knowing where you stood. Perhaps you simply reached a point where you realized that if someone wanted a place in your life, they needed to participate in creating that place. My beloved child, this is why you should not blame yourself for becoming quieter. There is a difference between giving up on love and refusing to chase uncertainty. Your soulmate may only now be beginning to understand that difference. They noticed when your energy changed. They noticed when you stopped making everything easy. They noticed when your attention became less available. And instead of recognizing that you were developing boundaries, they feared that someone else had taken their place. That possibility has been haunting them. They have imagined you speaking to someone new. They have imagined someone else becoming the person you trust. They have imagined you laughing with another person the way you once laughed with them. They have imagined you reaching a day when hearing their name no longer changes your heartbeat. And my beloved child, this is one of the reasons they are considering goodbye. It sounds strange, but sometimes people leave because they cannot tolerate watching the person they love become capable of living without them. They would rather disappear while they can still tell themselves a comforting story than remain close enough to witness reality change. Yet underneath that impulse is regret. They know they had opportunities to behave differently. They remember moments when you gave them openings to speak. They remember questions you asked that they answered vaguely. They remember times you tried to understand what was happening and they responded with silence. They remember when they could have said, "Please don't misunderstand me. I care more than I'm showing." Instead they protected themselves. Now they are beginning to understand that every time they protected themselves from vulnerability, they also prevented you from feeling secure in the connection. This realization hurts because it forces them to acknowledge their role in the distance. It is easier to say, "Things just didn't work out," than to say, "I was scared, and my fear affected someone I cared about." It is easier to blame timing than to admit that timing sometimes becomes an excuse for hesitation. It is easier to say goodbye than to apologize because an apology requires someone to lower their defenses and accept that the other person may still choose to walk away. My beloved child, your soulmate has imagined apologizing to you. In their mind, the words begin simply. I am sorry I made you question whether you mattered. Then another sentence follows. I am sorry I expected you to understand feelings I refused to explain. And then comes the hardest confession. I am sorry I kept waiting for you to prove you would stay while giving you so little certainty about whether I would stay. That is the contradiction they are finally seeing. They wanted reassurance while remaining guarded. They wanted loyalty while refusing vulnerability. They wanted you to believe in the connection while they themselves kept one foot near the exit. They thought this would protect them if everything fell apart. Instead, it may have helped everything fall apart. And now, standing near goodbye, they understand that leaving forever would not erase that truth. My beloved child, if this message is touching your heart, subscribe and stay connected for more messages like this, but do not subscribe to fear. Do not allow urgency in a title, a message, or another person's emotions to convince you that you must abandon your boundaries. If someone belongs in your life, honesty should bring them closer, not panic, manipulation, or pressure. Your soulmate does not need you to run after them. What they need to hear is that if there is something real they want to save, they must stop expecting you to save it alone. They must speak. They must ask the questions they avoided. They must listen to your experience. They must accept responsibility for their choices. And they must be prepared for the possibility that you have changed. That final part frightens them the most. Somewhere inside, they are still holding an image of you from the period when you would have welcomed almost any sign from them. They remember the version of you who searched for meaning in their smallest gestures. They remember when one message could brighten your entire day. They remember when you were willing to wait because you believed eventually they would become clear. But you have been growing, my beloved child. Your heart may still care, but your standards have changed. You are beginning to understand that a connection can be powerful and still require boundaries. You are learning that someone missing you does not automatically make them ready for you. You are learning that apologies are meaningful only when behavior begins changing afterward. Your soulmate senses that growth. They can feel that if they return now, they cannot simply continue where everything stopped. They would have to meet the person you have become. And the person you are becoming is less willing to accept emotional half-measures. This is one reason goodbye feels tempting to them. Part of them fears they are not capable of giving you what you now require. They ask themselves, what if I return and disappoint them again? What if I promise to be different but fall back into the same fear? What if they finally trust me and I hurt them? Those questions reveal something important. Your soulmate is not only afraid of being rejected by you. They are afraid of failing you. They know you deserve consistency. They know you deserve communication. They know you deserve someone who does not disappear whenever feelings become intense. And deep inside, they are questioning whether they have grown enough to become that person. My beloved child, you cannot answer that question for them. You cannot love someone into emotional readiness. You cannot do another person's healing simply because you understand why they struggle. Compassion can recognize their wounds, but compassion does not require you to accept being repeatedly hurt by those wounds. If they want to remain in your life, they must become responsible for what they carry. This is the message they need before goodbye. You do not need to be perfect to be loved, but you do need to be honest. You do not need to know every answer, but you need to stop hiding behind silence. You do not need to promise a flawless future, but you need to show that you are willing to communicate when fear appears. Imagine them hearing those words. Imagine the defenses becoming quiet. Because beneath everything, they have been waiting for permission to be imperfect. They thought they needed to arrive in front of you completely healed, completely certain, completely fearless. Since they could not become that person overnight, they kept postponing the conversation. But healthy love does not require someone to arrive without fear. It requires them to stop allowing fear to make every decision. They could say, "I am scared, but I want to try." They could say, "I don't know exactly what happens next, but I want to speak honestly." They could say, "I know I hurt you, and I want to understand what you need before asking for another chance." Those words would require courage, but not perfection. And your soulmate is slowly beginning to see the difference. Last night, they imagined what forever goodbye would actually mean. Not the dramatic moment of leaving, but everything afterward. Birthdays passing without a message. Important life changes they would hear about from somewhere else, if they heard about them at all. Seeing your future unfold from a distance. Knowing they no longer had the right to ask how you were. Imagining you eventually sharing your deepest thoughts with someone else. They had told themselves goodbye would bring relief, but when they imagined the reality of permanent absence, relief was not the emotion that came. Grief was. They realized they were not only saying goodbye to a person. They were saying goodbye to possibilities they had secretly carried. Ordinary possibilities. Sitting beside you after a long day. Celebrating your victories. Hearing about the small things nobody else cared about. Being the person you called when something happened. Learning what your life would look like 5 years from now. These were not fantasies they openly admitted, but somewhere inside, they had imagined them. And now goodbye meant surrendering all of them. That realization made them deeply emotional. Yet, my beloved child, even grief does not mean they should stay if they are unwilling to change. Sometimes people grieve what they are still not prepared to build. Your soulmate must decide whether they want you or merely the comfort of knowing you remain available. Those are not the same thing. Wanting you means respecting your needs. Wanting you means accepting that your boundaries are not punishment. Wanting you means becoming willing to have conversations that could make them uncomfortable. Wanting you means recognizing that the connection cannot survive forever on chemistry, longing, and imagined possibilities. It needs participation. And there is one more reason they are considering goodbye that they have not told anyone. Someone has been influencing their perception of the connection. A voice outside the two of you has been telling them that walking away is the smartest thing they can do. Perhaps this person believes they are protecting your soulmate. Perhaps they have their own reasons. Perhaps they simply do not understand what existed between you. But your soulmate has been listening to that voice because it reinforces their fear. They were told, if this person really wanted you, they would have done more. They were told, stop embarrassing yourself by caring. They were told, just disappear and move on. And for a while, those words sounded convincing. But recently your soulmate has begun asking a dangerous question. What if both of us were waiting for the other person to do more? What if your silence was not rejection? What if your distance was a response to theirs? What if you had been waiting for exactly the conversation they were too afraid to start? My beloved child, this possibility has interrupted their goodbye. They thought they knew your answer without asking you. Now they are realizing they may have built an ending on assumptions. And this is the thing they need to hear before they leave forever. Do not make a permanent decision based on a conversation that never happened. If there is something important that needs to be said, say it respectfully. If there is an apology that needs to be offered, offer it without demanding forgiveness. If there is a question that has remained unanswered, ask it honestly. Then accept the truth that comes back. That is courage. Not forcing someone to stay. Not manipulating an outcome. Simply refusing to let fear write an ending that honesty never had the opportunity to challenge. Your soulmate is closer to that realization than before. They have begun composing a final message, but each time they imagine sending goodbye, another sentence appears beneath it. But what if I told them the truth first? That sentence is keeping the door from closing. They are thinking about everything they never explained, including the exact moment when they became afraid of losing you. It happened earlier than you realize. There was a moment when something you said or did made them understand that you could become deeply important to them. Instead of moving closer, they panicked. They began protecting themselves before there was anything to protect themselves from. And almost every confusing decision afterward grew from that fear. Now they are finally tracing the distance back to its beginning. My beloved child, the goodbye they are considering is not only about leaving you. It is about whether they will continue being the person who runs whenever love asks them to become vulnerable. That is why this moment matters for their growth regardless of what happens between the two of you. If they leave without speaking, the pattern may follow them. If they stay only because they are afraid of being alone, the pattern may remain too. But if they choose honesty, whether honesty leads to reconciliation or closure, they will finally be doing something different. And you, my beloved child, must also choose differently. Do not abandon yourself to prevent someone's goodbye. Do not say yes to things that hurt you simply because you fear losing them. If they remain, let them remain because both of you can create something healthier. If they leave, let their departure create room for peace rather than a lifetime of chasing. You are not meant to stand at the doorway begging someone to recognize your worth. The right connection will eventually require two people willing to walk toward each other. And tonight, somewhere inside this imagined message, your soulmate is holding the goodbye they thought they had already decided to give you, but their hand is trembling because they have finally realized there is one confession they need to make before they can walk away. It begins with, "I need you to know why I really disappeared." Behind that sentence is a truth about their fear, a misunderstanding they never corrected, and a moment when someone else's words changed the way they saw your connection. They have carried that truth alone because admitting it would force them to acknowledge that the ending they were preparing may have been built upon something incomplete. So, my beloved child, do not chase the goodbye and do not chase the confession. Let truth come through real actions. If they choose to speak, listen without abandoning your boundaries. If they choose silence, continue walking toward your own future. Because the most important thing they need to hear before leaving is not, "Please don't go." It is this: if you love someone, do not make them fight alone for a connection you are secretly afraid to lose. My beloved child, stay here, because the goodbye they were preparing has still not been sent, and there is a reason their hand keeps hesitating every time they imagine making this ending permanent. They thought they had reached certainty. They thought they had finally convinced themselves that disappearing would be easier than continuing to carry unanswered feelings, but when they reached the moment where goodbye had to become real, something inside them refused to cooperate. The words looked wrong. The ending felt unfinished. And the sentence that kept interrupting everything was the same one their heart had been avoiding for far too long: "I need you to know why I really disappeared." My beloved child, that confession matters because their distance was not created by one simple reason. It was created by fear, misunderstanding, pride, outside influence, and a belief about you they never had the courage to verify. For a long time, they convinced themselves they were protecting their heart. Now they are beginning to understand that they may have been protecting themselves from something that was never actually going to happen. Somewhere along the way, someone said something about you. It may have sounded innocent at first. Perhaps someone suggested that you were not as emotionally invested as your soulmate believed. Perhaps they implied that you had other options, that you would eventually move on, or that you were only enjoying the attention. Whatever the exact words were, they touched an insecurity already living inside your soulmate. And instead of coming directly to you and asking, "Is this true?" they became quiet. That is what fear often does when it hears something it already secretly worries about. It does not investigate. It says, "I knew it." Your soulmate began watching everything you did through that new lens. A delayed reply became evidence. A quiet day became evidence. A moment when you seemed distracted became evidence. They took ordinary moments and connected them into a story their fear had already decided to believe. And the tragedy was that you did not know you were being judged against a story you had never heard. You may have sensed them becoming colder. You may have wondered why their energy suddenly changed. Perhaps you responded by protecting yourself, becoming quieter too. Then your soulmate looked at your withdrawal and thought, "See? I was right." My beloved child, two people can sometimes create enormous distance while both are responding to something neither has actually discussed. Your soulmate withdrew because they feared you would leave. You may have withdrawn because their behavior made you feel unwanted. They interpreted your self-protection as confirmation of their fear, and the cycle continued. Now, as they stand close to saying goodbye forever, they are beginning to see how much of the ending may have been built on assumptions rather than truth. This realization is painful because it means they must confront a question they desperately wanted to avoid: what if I was wrong? What if you were not preparing to abandon them? What if your feelings were genuine? What if the distance they saw in you was simply the result of the distance they created first? What if one honest conversation could have prevented months of confusion? My beloved child, these questions have become louder than the goodbye. Your soulmate keeps remembering specific moments differently now. There was a time when you asked if everything was okay. They gave you a short answer because they were afraid to reveal what they had heard. Now they realize that may have been an opportunity. There was another moment when you tried to become closer and they resisted. At the time they thought they were protecting themselves. Now they wonder whether you experienced that moment as rejection. There may even have been a moment when you gave them exactly the reassurance they wanted, but because fear had already taken control, they did not trust it. They kept searching for hidden danger inside something that may have been sincere. And now they are angry. Not necessarily with you, but with themselves. They are asking why they gave another person's opinion so much power. Why did they trust speculation more than the connection they had actually experienced? Why did they assume instead of ask? Why did they let pride stop them from saying, "Someone told me something, and I need to know whether it is true"? The answer is uncomfortable. They were afraid that if they asked directly, you might confirm their worst fear. Silence allowed them to postpone that possibility. But silence also created something worse, a slow emotional separation where neither person had enough information to understand what was actually happening. My beloved child, this is the confession behind the goodbye. They did not disappear because they woke up and stopped caring. They disappeared because caring had become dangerous in their mind. They believed attachment would eventually place them in a position where you could hurt them. So they tried to leave emotionally before you had the opportunity. But now they are realizing something, they experienced pain anyway. They did not escape heartbreak by creating distance. They simply experienced a different kind of heartbreak, the heartbreak of wondering what might have happened if they had been brave enough to communicate. This is why their goodbye feels impossible to complete. Saying goodbye now would require them to accept that they might never know the truth. They would have to live with the question, did I lose this person because the connection was impossible, or because I became afraid of something that was never real? That question could follow them for years. And somewhere inside, they know it. My beloved child, imagine what they would say if all their defenses disappeared for 5 minutes. Perhaps the words would sound like this: I need to apologize before I say anything else. I made decisions about us without giving you the opportunity to explain yourself. I let fear convince me that I knew what you were thinking. I watched your behavior looking for proof that you would eventually leave, and because I was looking for it, I found proof everywhere. I did not realize how unfair that was. You were responding to a version of me that had suddenly become distant, while I was interpreting your response as evidence that you didn't care. I wish I had spoken. I wish I had trusted you enough to ask the difficult question. I wish I had told you I was scared instead of pretending I was losing interest. And now I don't know whether there is anything left to save. My beloved child, notice the difference between accountability and excuses. Saying, I was afraid, does not erase what happened. But recognizing how fear shaped their behavior is the first step toward changing it. If this person ever returns to you, do not only listen for beautiful declarations of love. Listen for awareness. Do they understand what went wrong? Can they identify their own patterns without blaming you for everything? Can they acknowledge the emotional consequences of their silence? Can they remain present when you tell them something they do not want to hear? Those things will tell you more than dramatic words ever could. Your soulmate is beginning to understand this too. They know that if they speak before goodbye, they cannot make the conversation only about their pain. They cannot say, "I missed you, so everything should be fine now." They must make space for what you experienced. They must accept that while they were privately struggling, you may have been privately hurting. While they were afraid of rejection, you may have felt rejected. While they were protecting themselves from hypothetical abandonment, you may have been experiencing real abandonment through their absence. This realization is one of the reasons their heart feels so heavy. My beloved child, they remember you trying. They remember moments when you offered warmth after they became cold. They remember you giving opportunities for conversation. They remember how patient you were before something inside you finally became tired. At the time, they may have interpreted your patience as evidence that you would always remain available. Now they see it differently. Your patience was a gift, not a guarantee. Your care was something to appreciate, not something to assume would exist forever without reciprocity. And when they finally understood this, the goodbye they were preparing started feeling less like freedom and more like surrender. They began wondering whether they were walking away because the relationship had no future or because they were still terrified of becoming emotionally accountable. Those are very different reasons to leave. My beloved child, if this message is speaking to your heart, subscribe and stay connected for more messages like this, but never let a message convince you that you must sacrifice your dignity to keep another person. You do not need to prevent anyone from leaving through begging, proving, chasing, or abandoning your boundaries. The person who truly wants to build something with you must eventually choose participation. Let this message remind you of that. Your soulmate's fear belongs to them to confront. You can offer understanding, but you cannot do their courage for them. And right now, courage is exactly what they are being asked to find. They have imagined contacting you before saying goodbye. They have imagined starting with something simple. Can we talk honestly for a few minutes? Even those words frighten them because they know what comes afterward. Once the conversation begins, they can no longer hide behind assumptions. They will hear your version. They may discover they were wrong. They may discover you still care. Or they may discover that their hesitation lasted long enough for your feelings to change. Every possibility carries emotional risk. Yet for the first time, the risk of remaining silent seems greater. They are beginning to realize that truth can hurt once, but unanswered questions can hurt repeatedly. So they are considering choosing truth. But my beloved child, there is another layer behind their goodbye. They are not only afraid of losing you. They are afraid that they are not capable of being the partner you deserve. This fear has existed beneath everything. They have watched you grow stronger. They have noticed your standards changing. They sense that the version of you who once tolerated ambiguity has become someone who needs clarity. They know you are no longer impressed by temporary intensity. You want consistency. You want someone who communicates after the exciting moments end. You want emotional safety, not only chemistry. Your soulmate knows that returning to you would require becoming more mature than they were when the distance began. And part of them asks, what if I cannot do it? This is why goodbye can feel tempting. Leaving allows them to avoid being tested by real intimacy. They can tell themselves they loved you but circumstances were wrong. They can preserve a beautiful idea of the connection without confronting whether they have the skills to sustain it. Staying, however, requires growth. Staying means learning how to communicate when afraid. Staying means not disappearing after conflict. Staying means allowing you to have needs without interpreting those needs as pressure. Staying means being honest when jealousy appears instead of creating stories. Staying means understanding that vulnerability is not weakness. My beloved child, you cannot make them choose growth, but you can refuse to shrink your needs so they never have to grow. That is important. Perhaps in the past you were tempted to say, I won't ask for clarity because I don't want to scare them. Perhaps you minimized your needs to keep the connection peaceful. But peace created by one person remaining silent is not real peace. Healthy connection makes room for both hearts. If your soulmate comes back, they must be prepared to hear what you require, just as you can listen to what they fear. That is how two people stop repeating the same cycle. And something inside them is finally recognizing this. Their imagined confession continues. I don't want to ask you to become smaller so I can feel safer. I think that is what I was doing without realizing it. Every time you asked for clarity, I felt pressure because clarity required me to admit what I wanted. Every time you moved closer, I became afraid because closeness meant I could lose something important. I expected you to adjust to my fear while I did not do enough to understand what my distance was doing to you. If I speak to you now, I don't want to repeat that. I want to listen. I want to understand. And if your answer is that you cannot do this again, I want to respect that too. My beloved child, those last words are important because real love includes freedom. Someone who loves you cannot demand access to your heart simply because they finally became ready. Timing matters. Consequences matter. Your healing matters. You are allowed to say yes, no, not yet, or I need to see consistency first. You are allowed to take your time. You do not owe anyone an immediate decision because they arrive with strong emotions. Your soulmate needs to hear this before goodbye too. If they choose honesty, they must choose it without controlling the outcome. They must speak because truth is right, not because they are guaranteed to get you back. That is genuine courage. And there is something happening inside them now that suggests they may finally understand it. They are no longer imagining only the perfect reunion where you immediately forgive everything. They are imagining the difficult conversation too. They imagine you telling them that you were hurt. They imagine hearing about nights when you questioned yourself. They imagine you saying that trust will not return instantly. And instead of running from that possibility as they once would have, part of them is saying, I will listen. That is a small but meaningful shift. It does not guarantee what happens next. It simply shows that their internal battle is changing. My beloved child, there is also a memory they cannot stop replaying. It was the last time they felt truly close to you before everything changed. Perhaps neither of you knew it would become such an important memory. There may have been laughter, a long conversation, or a simple moment when everything felt unusually peaceful. Your soulmate remembers leaving that moment with two conflicting emotions. Happiness and fear. Happiness because being with you felt natural. Fear because they realized how much they wanted it to happen again. That was when they understood you had become emotionally important. And shortly afterward, the outside comment, misunderstanding, or insecurity appeared. The timing made the fear stronger. They had just realized how much they could lose when someone gave them a reason to believe losing you was inevitable. So they tried to get ahead of the pain. Now, standing at goodbye, they see how that decision shaped everything. My beloved child, they are asking themselves whether it is too late. You cannot answer that question through a spiritual message. Only reality can answer it. Only honest communication between two people can reveal what remains. But what you can know is this: you do not have to chase an answer. If they are truly about to leave and there is something they need to say, the responsibility belongs to them to say it. You have already spent enough energy trying to interpret silence. Let the next chapter be different. Let words become words. Let actions become actions. Let uncertainty stop masquerading as destiny. Your heart deserves something tangible. And now your soulmate is reaching the point where the goodbye message they were preparing is beginning to transform into something else. Instead of, "I think we should let each other go," they are imagining writing, "Before I walk away, I need to tell you the truth." Instead of pretending they feel nothing, they want to admit, "I became distant because I became afraid." Instead of leaving you with another unanswered question, they want to explain, "I believed something about you that I never gave you the chance to correct." And then comes the sentence that terrifies them most. "If I was wrong, I may have created this entire ending myself." My beloved child, that realization has shaken them because it removes the comforting idea that everything happened only because circumstances were impossible. It forces them to recognize their own agency. They had choices. They could have communicated. They could have asked. They could have trusted you with their fear. They did not. But they still have one choice left. Whether they repeat the pattern by disappearing again or finally do something different. That is the crossroads. Not simply stay or leave. Honesty or avoidance. Growth or repetition. And whatever they choose will tell you far more about their readiness than any hidden feeling ever could. If they choose goodbye without ever speaking, allow yourself to grieve and continue forward. Do not interpret their inability to communicate as evidence that you lacked value. If they choose to speak, listen carefully, but do not immediately surrender everything you learned during the distance. Let them show you who they have become. Let them earn trust through consistency. Let the relationship, if there is one to rebuild, develop slowly enough for reality to become clearer than fantasy. My beloved child, your greatest power in this moment is not stopping someone from leaving. It is knowing that you do not have to abandon yourself whether they stay or go. That is the truth beneath this urgent message. Your soulmate may be standing near a goodbye, but your future is not standing still. You have a life beyond their decision. You have love beyond one person's uncertainty. You have possibilities you cannot yet see. And if this person belongs in those possibilities, they must eventually arrive with courage. There is one final confession they have not yet placed into words, and it is the confession that may determine whether the goodbye is ever sent. They have realized that the thing they feared most was never simply losing you. It was allowing you to know how deeply losing you would affect them. That is why they acted indifferent. That is why they hid behind distance. That is why they allowed you to believe they could walk away easily. They thought showing attachment gave you power over them. Now they understand that hiding attachment gave fear power over both of you. And tonight, the words forming inside them are different. I don't want my final act towards someone I love to be another silence. Whether they find the courage to say those words is their choice. Your choice is to remain rooted in self-respect. Do not beg them to stay. Do not punish them if they speak honestly. Simply let truth reveal what fear has hidden. Because if this connection has another chapter, it should not begin with you dragging someone back from goodbye. It should begin with two people finally willing to stand in the same truth and ask whether they can build something healthier from it. And if there is no next chapter, then let the ending at least teach you this: the person who is meant to remain beside you must eventually learn that love cannot survive forever behind locked doors. Your soulmate now knows the door is closing. The question is whether they will finally speak before it does.